We are delighted to be sharing with you our latest guidance report, Improving Social Emotional in Primary Schools. My name is Susanna Schofel and I'm joined today by my colleague Tanya Vallon. We're going to provide a little bit of insight into some of the research that sits behind this report. We're going to dive into the recommendations and share a few of the additional resources that have been developed to support this work in schools in Australia. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we as a team live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm going to introduce my colleague Tanya now to share a little bit of the history and background of evidence for learning. So over to you, Tanya.
Thanks a lot, Susanna. It is very exciting to be here launching the SEL guidance report. So at Evidence for Learning, really what we're focused in on predominantly is increasing the learning by improving the evidence of what works and why. And really our vision is in Australia where evidence-informed practices really increases learning so that all children, regardless of background, have the best possible chance of success. Now, we're fortunate to be incubated inside of Social Ventures Australia, and Social Ventures Australia is an organisation based across Australia that's really focused in on how to create the best conditions so that all communities and people thrive. We're also partners in this work with the Education Endowment Foundation, who have been leading similar work in the UK for the past 8 years, and we're the licensee of all their work here. We're very fortunate to have received $6 million worth of funding to start in this work from the Commonwealth Bank, and we have had other numerous funders as well. So we're an evidence intermediary and we play in 3 key areas. The first being that of building evidence, the second of sharing evidence, and the third of supporting evidence use. So we build evidence through our Learning Impact Fund, which pairs an independent evaluator with a program of promise, and we act as an intermediary in that service to produce RCTs and reports on those on different programs that are being used currently throughout Australia, such as Quick Smart Numeracy, Thinking Maths, Mini Lit, and Resilient Families. We then share knowledge through our Teaching and Learning Toolkit, which we'll walk you through today as well. This is a summary of over 35 different approaches in education that is a meta-analysis of international research that provides key information on cost, impact, and evidence security. We've also produced the Early Childhood Toolkit, which really focuses in on those children aged from 2 to 5. And then what we've done in partnership with different organisations across Australia is map those 35 different approaches within the toolkit and the 12 approaches within the Early Childhood Toolkit to different policy bases that exist across Australia, such as the Australian Professional Standard for Teachers and the Australian Professional Standard for Principals. We support use predominantly in the form that you can see now, and that's by outreach and talking to audiences. So we've been fortunate to participate in and facilitate over 230 events to date. And a key part, and that's Susanna's role in this work, is being the production of guidance reports on different topics. And today we're presenting on SEL, but we have an additional 9 guidance reports in addition to this one. So in our work, we have formed partnerships right across Australia. And you can see that we've connected with over 9,000 600 educators, both in face-to-face and webinar formats, for the past 5 years in this work. And we've established long-term collaborations with different bodies in both across all sectors, including government, independent and Catholic sectors.
So I wanted to just jump in and share a little bit about SEL and how we're defining that. So social emotional learning is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions. They set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. This definition comes from the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning, who are a US-based organisation. CASEL have re-released this framework in 2020. This is a particularly strong definition for an Australian educator base because it aligns so neatly to our general capabilities within the Australian curriculum, particularly personal and social capabilities. But there's clear crossover with ethical considerations as well. And the framework here that I'll show you now talks to these particular competencies around social emotional learning. So self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness, and relationship skills. Really core to this updated diagram from CASEL is the environment in which these thrive and survive. So the importance of these happening across not just a classroom or individual level, but reinforced at the school level, in partnership with families and caregivers, as well as with the community. So this is just a snapshot of how we are looking at SEL, and there are some differences in how Tanya and I will talk about these today. So the toolkit, which Tanya will walk you through in just a moment, looks at approaches for social emotional learning, which come from across a wide range of schooling, primary and secondary. The guidance report, when we jump into that, will look particularly at the approaches for primary schools. So just to flag that with everyone as we head into this, this session around the toolkit. So Tanya, I will hand over to you to do a live walkthrough of this toolkit and the social emotional learning strand now.
Thanks, Susanna. So here we have the front page for Evidence for Learning. So that's found at evidenceforlearning.org.au. Now, to get to our toolkit, we click on the toolkit bar just there and we scroll down. And today we're looking at children aged in primary with the SEL. So we'll go to the Teaching and Learning Toolkit, which spans from primary school right through to secondary. If we click on then Full Approaches Toolkit, what comes up for us there, we can see is a list of 35 different approaches. This is all underpinned by over 10,000 research studies. And if we have a look at social emotional learning, I'll talk you through the icons that we can see there. So the icons represent the average cost in dollar signs, the evidence security, that's the depth and breadth of evidence that sits underneath this particular approach, and then the months of impact. And this is a translation from the effect size, from the meta-analysis. When we're looking at the evidence security, we can see that this is really high. If we have a quick look back to where we were, looking at the whole toolkit, and if we sort according to evidence security, we can see that there are quite a few at 4, but that's our second highest ranking for evidence security. So we really have quite a bit of evidence around social emotional well-being and that aspect. So now let's take a bit of a deeper dive into what that actually looks like. So with the Teaching and Learning Toolkit, you can see the headings there on the left-hand side, and that indicates a definition. So what is it? How effective is it? How secure is the evidence? What are the costs? and what should I consider, and then the references. The what should I consider is probably the most practical bit about turning evidence into action. But what we have is even increased practicality as driven by the guidance report findings that Susanna will take you through. In terms of a definition, this is the scope of that the studies were collected underneath this particular area. So universal programs, specialised programs, and then school level programs really targeting to develop a positive school ethos. Now, if I take you through what I think is the beating heart of the Teaching and Learning Toolkit, and that's our references. So what we have here, we have our definition again, our evidence rating. We have the references so you can click out to those at any stage and have a look at some of the evidence, the meta-analysis that is underpinning these studies. So here are our meta-analysis, and we can see there's quite a wide range of effect sizes looking at different programs. And then we have some single studies as well. So within this, a mean weighted effect size has been calculated, which takes into account how many students are in each one of those studies, so giving us the most accurate picture possible of impact. What we've done then is taken that 0.28 and we've translated that into our +4 months worth of learning progress, because we think that this is a more natural way to think about progress in terms of the school. So we're talking about +4 months of progress in our calendar year. If we jump back and have a look at the first tab underneath the further reading, this is our Australasian research summary. So this was developed up with the Centre for Program and Evaluation out of the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, with Janet Clinton heading up that group. And what they did, they looked at the research for the past 6 years, both qualitative and quantitative, in Australia and New Zealand, that really highlighted what are some of the programs in CEL that we can see occurring and what are their impacts across Australia. So this is a good one to go to and have a look and see what are some of the programs. Where the guidance report has gone further on this is that it actually has illustrations of practice from schools that have been gathered just in the last few months. So that updates this even further. And at this point, I'll hand back to Susanna to work through the findings from the guidance reports.
Thank you, Tanya. And as Tanya mentioned, these guidance reports sort of step one further step out of the toolkit to really distill some of those learnings into recognised recommendations, which are actionable and really focused on how school leaders particularly can drive change in their school. So we have, as Tanya mentioned at the top of today, released 9 guidance reports now on a range of high priority topics. The key audience for each of these documents are school leaders, and there are certainly recommendations and implications for teaching staff as well. We have developed these in partnership with the Education Endowment Foundation. So they were first released in the UK based on global evidence, but with a focus on UK educators. And part of the translation process that we run here in Australia is to work alongside systems and professionals, academics and schools to start to contextualise these for Australia. And we're very fortunate to have the support of the Catholic Education Office Melbourne, as well as Professor Helen Cahill from University of Melbourne, who was an incredible critical friend through this process. And should acknowledge as well a number of schools, both government and Catholic in the Victorian system, who contributed to the illustrations that you'll find throughout the social emotional learning in primary schools guidance report in particular. So each of these guidance reports has between 4 and 8 concrete recommendations for school leaders. And that's what we're going to really work through today in terms of the social emotional learning in primary schools guidance report. Before we get there, and Tanya did touch on this because it is drawn from the toolkit, we have a number of levels of interventions and activities when we talk about SEL at a school level. And fundamentally, we can break them down into one of 3 categories. So targeted intensive type approaches where students or a particular student might need additional support given greater need. Universal approaches that happen at a whole class level. These are often curriculum type approaches, and you'll see a lot of these in the guidance report. And then finally, school culture and environment type supports, which are the ethos, the policies and practices that happen across a school that reinforce what's happening in the classroom. When we dive into the guidance report, you'll see that we've really focused on the bottom 2 tiers of this triangle, this pyramid, the universal pieces and the school culture and environment. These are where leaders and teachers can have the most impact on the greatest number of students. When we start to talk about targeted intensive activities around SEL, that's often where we need to draw on expertise that sits outside of classroom teachers and others. So those, for the purpose of this guidance report, haven't always been included, although there is some mention of where they come in and fit together. These are the recommendations that have been distilled for this particular guidance report, and you'll see that they're broken down into 4 categories. So we have got teaching strategies. We then look at curriculum, zoom out a little bit further to think about the whole school approach. And then finally, and something that we're really passionate about at Evidence for Learning, is looking at the implementation aspects of social emotional learning as incredibly critical to the success of anything that happens in a school. I'm going to briefly talk through each one of these recommendations, but please treat this as an invitation to jump into the guidance report itself and have a really deep dive into what's sitting in here. So each of these guidance report recommendations will have illustrations, examples of practice, definitions, and research summaries that support this particular recommendation being made. The very first one is the need to teach SEL skills explicitly. We see this a lot through the importance placed on these particular skills through the Australian curriculum, which is terrific. Again, we go back to the Castle definition and really talk about these competencies or skills as self-awareness, self-monitoring, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Each of these in the guidance report, we really step out in detail, not just from a what does this mean, but what does this look like in a school setting? So you'll find examples of activities that could support each of these skills independently of one another. Explicit teaching, of course, is a big demand on teachers. And so that's something that when we get to recommendation 6 around implementation is incredibly important to remind ourselves of. The second recommendation, again, and this links to structures as well, is to integrate and model SEL skills through everyday teaching. So not just as a part of our 1 hour a week SEL time, but to have these things embedded through all subjects at primary school and taught by all teachers and modelled also. So this could be through providing feedback on when students are demonstrating self-management, for example, or by setting up processes around group work that allow students to collaborate in a really respectful way. The third piece of advice, the third recommendation, is to plan carefully for adopting a SEL program. So this sits within the curriculum dimension of the report. This is really important for schools because it's where we see a lot of the context occurring And this is context that only you in schools have got the insight into. So thinking about what are the needs of our school students and how does that work for us? Now, there's a number of different things that could happen in this place. There might be programs that you have access to that are developed by external people. There might be an opportunity for that type of program to be modified, or there might be an opportunity for schools to develop their own work, and we'll talk about that too in recommendation 4. But thinking about the sort of key aspects of what is it that we want to achieve, how do we do that, and then backwards mapping that, well, what's going to get us to that point so that we can be really deliberate about what is the CEL program, initiative, approach, ethos that we're going to build within our school. The 4th recommendation, and I've touched on a couple of these points because they do overlap quite significantly, is to use a SAFE curriculum. And SAFE is sequential, active, focused, and explicit. There's a number of ways in which this already exists in our system. So certainly the general capabilities and the progressions and scope and sequence that sit there reinforce this work. So we don't feel like this advice is going to be amiss with teachers. We certainly wouldn't want to add workload. There are great supports already in place within our system. Looking at not just what's happening in my classroom, but as a curriculum coordinator or as a school leader, how does this play across our year levels as students progress from foundation through to year 6? One of the examples that you'll see in the guidance report is actually this progression. And we've used an example within the guidance report on emotions. This is directly tied back again to Castle, but with an example from the Australian curriculum in personal social capabilities. So talking about how emotions as a topic or a theme can be worked through from foundation all the way through to year 6. The 5th recommendation is where we're getting to the school-wide piece. These are often where approaches start. So thinking about the culture and the ethos that a school contributes and their value towards CEL. Things like establishing school-wide norms and expectations, routines. We see often the use of circle time, the reinforcement through assemblies, anti-bullying procedures and policies, for example. It might be something as simple as a buddy bench or a sort of calm courtyard that a lot of schools have got in place now. It's really important that these things intersect with what's happening in the classroom, and that both the explicit teaching happening in the class and these whole school ethos and environments reinforce one another. So making sure that students understand the explicit nature of those things is incredibly important too. And finally, the implementation of CEL. So recommendation 6 is plan, support and monitor around CEL implementation. Implementation can really be the difference between a good approach going very well and not having an impact. So it's incredibly important that, particularly in a space that is still emerging in terms of the Australian evidence base, that schools take it upon themselves to plan and to support and to monitor everything that they're doing in this space. It certainly has to be commensurate to the effort going into a program. We don't want to be collecting more data and evidence that is required, but to be thinking really thoughtfully about how these things are happening in the schoolyard. There's a number of things that can play in here, and some terrific examples from schools that we've spoken about who actually use the processes that are implicit within CEL as a teaching staff, things like reflection, to monitor their own success in teaching CEL skills. It's certainly from a leadership perspective, this is where it really comes to the fore, the importance of strong, involved leadership. So ensuring that staff have got the right professional development opportunities, the right time, that they have everything that they need to support this work, is going to be incredibly important in the implementation. This recommendation, and we have put all of this documentation into the guidance report as well, links strongly to a guidance report that we produced, our first guidance report, in fact, which is called Putting Evidence to Work, A School's Guide to Implementation. This is a really process-based document which talks about not just the implementation science theory, but, well, how do we look at these implementation stages within a school? So when you get to this stage, we'd really recommend that you use those documents hand in hand. I just wanted to flag too, before we sort of wrap up, that there are a number of resources that we've developed at Evidence for Learning to support this document. One of them in particular is something that we've had really positive response from schools with, is an audit and discussion tool. And I will show you just a snapshot of one of the pages that sits within this discussion tool. It's a very short 5-page document, and it looks at the sort of approaches that happen from a leadership and teaching perspective. But the page I'll bring up talks very much to the whole school approach. And so this is an example of one page that you'll see. The first point on the side is around big questions for discussion. These are really designed for schools to take and to have those really informative and open conversations with one another about, well, what does SEL mean to us? What does it look like? How does it fit in with what we're already doing? And then the audit side of things, again, is a really positive opportunity to reflect on what are the strengths that we have as a school in developing SEL in our students, and all the way through to, well, where should we put some more energy, or what do we need, what gap do we need to fill to make sure we can be successful in the future? To go on from here, it might also give you an idea, if you're thinking this is an area for growth, about where to focus energies on from the guidance report first. But the key of the guidance report really is to intertwine those recommendations rather than to take recommendation 2 and 4 and leave the rest. I really want to close out now. So that was really a quick whistle stop through this incredibly comprehensive report. So please treat this as an opportunity to dive in and engage further. Evidence for Learning really relies on feedback from the profession and input from academics and schools. So we are keen to hear from you about your experience using this guidance report and other guidance reports. If you would like to get in touch with us, we would be more than happy to have a conversation and to get your insights. So contact details here for us. We've had a really terrific, successful webinar series in 2020, so please go back and revisit those webinars as you enjoy the break as well. But I will finish us off there and say thank you so much for engaging with this guidance report. We hope that you find it incredibly valuable in your school, particularly as you head into 2021. Thank you.